For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Just before we reflect on what's a very mournful and somber period for our nation, let me just go very, very quickly, as you said, just through the global markets. Basically, Asia fairly mixed this morning, as you would expect, given that Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, said that he would fight inflation until the job is done. The implication there being, of course, that interest rates will continue to rise in the UK, and stock futures not doing a great deal today. The EU raised its interest rates by a record level, about 0.75% yesterday. Again, worried about inflation. The fight in inflation continues there. And as far as the UK business is concerned, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, unveiled a package. Energy bills are to be capped at £2,500. More details expected for Help to Build Business. But whichever way you look at it, this £150 billion at least package is the biggest one ever to be unveiled and applied in peacetime, and that's really where it went. But of course, the major news today is yesterday's death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The mood, I think, in the UK, if I can sum it up, is one we all feel a bit like orphans. This glorious woman has been around for most of our lifetimes, since she came to the throne in the 1950s, and she reigned for 70 years. Whether or not you believe in a monarchy, you can't help feeling that she was a rock, really. This is what Liz Truss said yesterday, the new Prime Minister, the rock on which the United Kingdom has been built. And I think that she also distinguished herself. Nobody really knew what she thought about things. Her personal thoughts were always something which were relatively confidential and only transmitted to the various serving prime ministers who went to visit her. But watching the tributes coming in today, you get the feeling that she was a global queen, and this is something which we may never ever see again. So it has been, if I can put it like this, and I'm sure I speak for the majority of people living in this country, a privilege to grow up during her reign, the like of which will never be seen again. I have no doubt about that.
Right. Michael, very somber one, very sad one for the UK there. But I'd like to talk about inflation. Now that Jerome Powell has said it's going to fight inflation, what's going to be the ripple effect like on the market? Because we are seeing those effects already. Markets jittery here and there about the level of uncertainty that is going on. You can see it across in the Eurozone, inflation rates getting to a all-time high. You can even see in the UK itself, amidst all of the somber mood, the UK is dealing with 10% inflation and it's still going to grow further than that. What's going to be the ripple effect on the market?
I think the markets will probably be quite sanguine about it, in as much as they will be trading today and over the next few days. I think that generally speaking, the central banks, even though they've been acting at their own pace, and we've often mentioned this, certainly I think most people were thinking it was about time that the ECB actually did something. We're seeing what the chairman of the Fed has said in the United States, that he'll be fighting inflation until the job is done. And I suspect this will probably happen here. I mean, the most important thing about inflation, which I keep saying, is this: it is not a reflection of where prices are. It's the rate of price increase, and therefore the actual rate of inflation, as these energy costs start to be capped in the UK, will probably fall next year. It doesn't mean to say that life gets less expensive. It means that the rise in prices will be measured to be falling, and that will have, I think, an important effect, one, on the equity markets, but most importantly, I think, on the rate at which the money is going to be clearly needed to be borrowed over the next 20 to 25 years. This is going to be something which today's problems will be passed on to our children and their children to onto our grandchildren. There's no question about that. Now, whether you think that's a good idea, I suspect there probably weren't many more options. But I feel as though today and over the weekend and over the next few days, the thoughts of most of the markets and most of the people in the UK will be turning away from the immediate problems and thinking about the longevity of what we've seen and the longevity of this woman's influence upon all our lives.
Okay, I was going to ask you about the energy price guarantee that was announced by Prime Minister Liz Truss yesterday. Do you think that it goes far enough for households, and the 6 months package for businesses? Those businesses that consume a lot of energy, how would they fare under this regime? And why is it so difficult for the Prime Minister to just spell out, how this will be funded? Although analysts, as we pointed out yesterday, say it will come from borrowing, and that the burden will, of course, be borne, if not now, but later, by the taxpayer.
I think a lot of businesses were disappointed that it only appears 6 months long. The fact of the matter is that many of it's very, very complicated as far as business is concerned. Many of them have entered into their own contracts with energy companies, and it probably, I'm guessing this, but I'm guessing this is why the 6 month. I don't think they were incapable of projecting the figures further than 6 months. I think because the whole situation, as I've been reading it this morning, it's very, very complicated as far as business is concerned. As far as households are concerned, probably doesn't touch the sides for many of them, but at least it's a start. And I don't like things that are paid. Debts that continue on into the far distant future. But I suspect this is what we're going to see with those. So at least it's at least it's a help. It's the biggest package of peacetime government intervention that I can certainly remember, and I think most people are believing that it probably is the biggest the biggest government intervention in an economy in peacetime. And again, the energy, again, we've sort of moved away from the idea of a windfall tax. I'm not saying that energy companies will be allowed to get away with it. I think that what they will do, they will be forced to do, and clearly a lot of background discussions have been taking place about this. They'll be told that they need to invest for the future, and this will run into this will run into the freeing of contracts about drilling in the North Sea and so on, which again is something which Liz Truss is very, very keen to do.
The criticisms that I alluded to yesterday have continued with this announcement that she's making the wrong people pay, essentially. But what is your take on what will happen next going forward? Like you were saying earlier, there's a lot more detail that needs to be explained. Do you think there'll be a cut on VAT on fuel bills, for example? I've been listening to Martin Lewis on that.
Yeah, I think there probably will be some sort of tax cuts. I mean, at the moment, the guess is 5% off VAT and also personal tax cuts as well. But this is the way that this maybe slightly less spending on the NHS. I read an article saying, well, the usual complaint from Labour would be, you're selling off the NHS to your rich friends. Well, why not? I mean, they may run it better than the public services actually do. I mean, it's a shibboleth. It's a political football. It's something which no politician dare talk about. But the fact of the matter is, it's been mismanaged and overspent for years. As far as businesses are concerned, again, I do feel as though there is that complication about future contracts. I'm being very charitable about this, I grant you, but I think that's the reason why it's at 6 months at the moment, and it may be something which is going. As far as people like Martin Lewis are concerned, yes, of course they've been complaining, saying government must do something, but when they've actually been asked about what government should do, there hasn't been a great deal of answers. I feel as though the only way forward is to project this debt into the future. It's not very clever. And it doesn't work very well, but I think it's the only option there is. And I think that most countries around the world, apart from the United States, which is relatively self-sufficient in energy, will be forced to think about similar kind of things.
All right, thank you for your time this morning, Michael. Now for business updates across the African continent, Rotis Adiri joins us. Good morning, Rotis.
Good morning, Tunde. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Rufai. Yeah, so, a lot's been said about Queen Elizabeth's relationship with Africa. It's been reflections based on how, after her passing. She gave her, first speech from South Africa at the age of 21. She was in Kenya when her father passed, and she found out she was going to become, ascend to the throne when King George VI passed. She was in Kenya at that time. She had a, positive relationship with Zimbabwe in the early days, but then after Mugabe's land reform policies, the relationship kind of soured. Remember us, Nigeria being suspended from the Commonwealth '95 due to Abacha's human rights abuses, and then being readmitted in '99. So she had a warm relationship with us as well. And she famously, allegedly, there's talk that she, was angry at Thatcher when Thatcher refused to impose sanctions on South Africa for during apartheid. And then there's also the discussion of the monarchs, or rather colonial impact on African trade. I mean, trade was happening on the continent before they arrived. There's that famous quote, which has been attributed to Desmond Tutu, but it's never been, verified, that when they arrived, we had the land, they had the Bibles, and when told us to close our eyes, and when we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bibles. The districts drawn around the different colonies, how has that impacted trade over time? Did it improve trade? If you think about trade within African nations now, and you think about how far we've come with the African Continental Free Trade Area, they talk about unity within the African, among the colonies, basically Anglophone and Francophone. They talk of us wanting to get a unified currency, and the fact that the Francophone countries are pegged to the euro, so their currency is a bit more stable than ours, and the complications that has made for us to try to get a unified currency, losing central bank independence. So there's a lot of, I guess, historical context and a lot to fall back on, looking back on her legacy. So she will actually very much be missed. But her relationship, she did have a very, very close relationship with the African continent. Talked about how she's visited more countries in Africa than anybody she knows, So yeah, so she definitely, may she rest in peace. Moving on to other matters here, oil and gas still making the rounds. The Upstream Regulatory Commission says in the August report that oil output fell to about 972,000 barrels, which is a new low. So we're still seeing impact of oil theft on our production, and it continues. That's from the Upstream Regulatory Commission. NATI, the Extractive Industries and Transparency Initiative, a report they put out said that we've spent 13.7 trillion on fuel subsidies over the last 13 years. You made the rounds on social media with your comment on getting ready for fuel subsidies at 500 naira. Yeah, it is. Yeah. There's actually, but see, there's still this on subsidies. A lot of people still think that with working refineries and the Dangote refineries that the price will stay low, and the fundamentals just do not support that. There was a Business Day headline to that effect where they talked about petrol to sell above 400 naira per litre, even with the Dangote refinery and all the NMP, all the refined. If this is in a scenario where optimum capacity, they're all working at full capacity. You're just talking about more supply. Still, the fact that the largest inputs is priced in, it's crude. It's priced in dollars, right? So, this, I don't know how we're going to hammer this home, but just to prepare people, if subsidies are removed in June, July of next year, the fundamentals do not support the price coming. In fact, here's a clip. I've had this is even before this headline, but Chika Mbona, Rise business analyst, take a listen.
I think the refineries will deliver.
Yeah.
Something happen next year. We're hoping that next year will happen. Dangote refinery come on stream, and at least Port Harcourt refinery come on stream, and then before Kaduna refinery, and the supply will come in. But let Nigerians not believe
the price
that it will be at.
Thank you.
That's rate.
We should prepare ourselves for the price of deregulated fuel.
Subsidies has to go.
On the aviation front, NANTA, the Association of Air travelers or travel agencies have said that the $265 million, this is actually, I think it's in this day newspaper, the $265 million that was disbursed to the foreigners, not all of it has been received. And so there's still, some of that is still outstanding. Foreign airlines have hiked. Well, we already know that already. They've already hiked their fares to where they almost double what they used to be. And then finally, still on the matter of theft of natural resources, South Africa is planning a special police task force to address illegal mining there. So that's our update for today.
Right.
So, okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Tundu.
Go ahead, Tundu.
Okay. I think it's slightly more than an allegation with regards to the Queen and Margaret Thatcher clashing. We'll never know for a fact because the Queen was famously discreet, never explained, never complained. Right. But there's just too much evidence to support the fact that she was in a rage over Margaret Thatcher's support for the racist apartheid policies of South Africa. And I think for her, what was her driving, force was her Commonwealth, as she described it. Yeah. Now, all of us, I imagine, well, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I imagine we all find the colonial era completely distasteful. Right. There was a time when the Queen of England was also the Queen of Nigeria until we got independence, thankfully. And there's still countries that she's still their queen, even though she doesn't reside there. It's a completely backwards, ruinous system from which we are still reeling. Yeah. But personally, she's somebody I have enormous admiration for, which I've said on this show a million times. My sweetheart OG will always include little stories about the Queen to make me happy because she knows I love her. I really do. I love the Queen. I'm able to separate her as an individual, her uncommon moral rectitude, her wisdom, her restraint. I truly admire. I could go on about her for like an hour. From the institution, from the monarchy. It was actually her namesake, Elizabeth I, that we have to blame for slavery and its ensuing horrors, because she's the one, apart from, to a lesser extent, Henry VIII, but I blame Elizabeth I. But, you can have a more nuanced position and separate the individual from those ills, because she herself was just a figurehead. She was a ceremonial monarch. Since Charles I had his head chopped off, there has been no absolute monarchy in the United Kingdom, and that was in the 1600s. Remember Oliver Cromwell? He was decapitated for treason. No monarch can ever overstep their boundaries. She dared not cause any kind of constitutional crisis by trying to stamp her authority on any policy of her own government. They're called Her Majesty's government, but really they call the shots, and that's just the bottom line.
So I want to talk about trade. It was skewed. Let's go back historically. All the antecedent data will show you that it was skewed in favor of the British. Of course. Should we start on the eastern flank with Cecil Rhodes and Benny Battano?
Oh gosh, not him.
Two guys that came out of, in fact, Cecil was still a student in Oxford. He took a time off school to come to Africa to see the windfall, and he got most swaths of land, diamond for him and all of that, across the East African flank. The nations were named after him, Rhodesia and the likes. And that trade was skewed. At the point where he died, Cecil was one of the richest men in the world, if not the richest in the world, and that wealth was made from Africa. I think Cecil died before he was 50.
In fact, not a good addition then.
Yeah. Also, let's not also forget the time that despite the fact that it was being called the Queen's Cup, the British Commonwealth, they were still holding the ace as regards our finances. Don't forget something called the Sterling Union, which, kudos to him, Obafemi Awolowo had to make a strong argument to fight us to leave the Sterling Union because he was the commissioner in charge of finance then in Nigeria. And that was when we floated the Naira in the early 70s and started to stabilize our currency, because prior to this time, stronger than the dollar. And prior to this time, it was shillings, and that's what our grandmothers would call shilekan, monkan, actually pounds and shillings, actually, until Awolowo took us out of the Sterling Union. And we had to fight, but when you look at it on the flip side of it, those colonized by the French are still going through that. Today, they spend the CFR, they're still domiciled. We were under that before we pulled out of that. And when you also even look at the trade antecedents, 1838, 1840 here, full-on trade, the likes of the McIvers of this world, the Royal Niger Company coming in and all of that. They took our natural resource and they just frittered it away. Then the Germans fought them from it, the likes of the Glaziers, the likes of the Womans of this world, they all came here. So trade was always skewed against us. But I think with technology, we've been able to create some level of equalization, but that's why we need to invest more in research and development to be able to equalize it. Can we truly equalize things? It's far-fetched because, you know, they went through the industrial age. We didn't go through the industrial age. As at the 1900s, Britain was the industrial powerhouse of the world, produced more goods in the north of England, Manchester, and some other areas, more than any part in the world. So we didn't go through that phase, but maybe with technology and good leadership mostly, we can equalize things. But trade wasn't fair if you look at it. But also, you can also speak for partnerships. You know, Commonwealth, DFI, the development agencies, what they've been able to do.
has been very helpful.
What they've been able to do. You know, maybe them seeing that, okay, injustices have been done over the years, let's liberalize it. So we give them their own credit, but historical distance, the data doesn't show anything.
That's the conversation her passing has
At the time Queen Elizabeth was born in 1926, the British Empire had a population of about 600 million people. It was an empire. By the time she assumed the throne following the death of her father, King George VI, in 1952, that empire was in transition. And for the better part of her reign, she presided over that transition from empire to a modernizing world. And part of her heritage, part of her legacy, was her acting as a stabilizing force, you know, all through that transition. When she became queen in 1957, incidentally, you are drawing her relationship with Africa. She was in Kenya, you know, with her husband at a place called Sagana, and then she became queen from Africa. But later on, of course, as the empire began to enter a modern era, she was a connecting link between the old colonies and the new Great Britain that emerged. And she did a lot to put a positive spin on that transition, or the heritage of the colonies, or of colonialism, you know, by being very gracious. And as head of the Commonwealth, you know, most of the members being former colonies, our own positive attitude, graciousness, you know, helped to strengthen this relationship. And in that regard, she did a lot in terms of maintaining that link with Africa. Hence those repeated visits. I think she must have visited Nigeria up to about 3 times, you know, in the course of her reign. And because of that, she was not just, you know, queen of England. She was also of Great Britain. She was also queen in Australia, in Canada, in Jamaica, and head of state in 14 other countries. Now, I get a point about trade being, you know, the imbalance in trade relations. Well, partly because many of these African countries also do not have the capacity to live up to their own commitments, you know, or to be able to strike a good deal. It's not just, the imbalance is not just between the UK and African countries. Look at China, look at Zambia, you know, look at Kenya, all of these countries that are so heavily indebted to China just because our leaders don't always look closely at the fine print. So the blame is not that of the colonialists, it's also about leadership. But going beyond all of this, the question to ask is that what is now the future of that relationship between the UK and the Commonwealth, or the African countries specifically? Many of these countries, they've become republics. Other countries are asking to become republics, okay? And gradually, we're likely to see a different Commonwealth, a different kind of relationship between those former colonies and, you know, the UK. However, you've also seen that there have been protests, you know, some people reminding us of the evil of colonialism and arguing that you cannot, you know, effectively distance Queen Elizabeth II from that, despite her graciousness, her stoicism, and all of that. In Australia, one Professor Sandy O'Sullivan says, no, you know, it's nice for all of us to praise the Queen, but, you know, she was also an inheritor of part of the pain of colonialism. Professor Uju Anya, you know, a Nigerian professor who teaches modern languages at the Camelon you know, CMU, Carnegie Mellon University, you know, also caused quite an uproar, you know, on Twitter yesterday for making negative comments about the Queen, with Jeff Bezos even going into it. So you see, with the colonies, with the former colonies, the memories...
They're mixed.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, but I want to go back to the point about nuance. It's possible to have a bit of balance here. And I think that lady, her bitter rant should have been directed at Harold Wilson. He was prime minister when Nigeria was at war. What do you really expect Elizabeth to do is the question, like I was saying earlier. And regards to the Commonwealth, you make a great point, Dr. Abati, about the future of the Commonwealth. I'm thinking it might end up being a bit like how, you know, Rwanda wasn't a British colony and joined the Commonwealth. It might just be a club of nations who want to trade together and what have you, because there's also a problem with Charles, King Charles III as he is now, whether or not he'll automatically succeed his mother as she wanted, he just might not. So there are all kinds of nuances there, but yes, that colonial era was deeply evil and we all ought to resent it, but how far do you want to go? White supremacy is enjoyed by all people with white skin, even those who vehemently oppose it. They are inheritors of that advantage. So really, how far are we going to take it? I just find a lot of these bitter rants really unfortunate, quite frankly.
Join Twitter. Get on Twitter.
You know, you're always trying to get me to join Twitter.
No,
it's not going to happen.
Look, they ask for you every day.
I'm the most antisocial person ever, so social media is not going to work.
It's hellfire out there.
But
it is.
It's hellfire.
Oh my God.
But what I just want to say is, when you look at it critically, when you still look at it critically, she herself even knew this before she passed. And that's why I say it's more of a commonwealth of friends rather than that historical entity.
Finally, on the removal of subsidy. But we argue again and again,
topic.
You know, that it's not sustainable. The GMD of NNPC Limited says, look, if the subsidy goes, we'll be buying fuel at about 482 naira per litre. Now, there will be consequences. Inflation is already 19.64%. Food inflation is over 20%. Now, how do you manage the process of removal? Which government will have the courage to do it? Because it takes the political will to do it. And how do you deal with the consequences? Those are the associated questions. Yes. Well, thank you, Rotus.
Thank you so much.